All right, welcome. Now in this video, we're going to install Visual Studio, and we want to make sure that we install the correct version and that we set this up so that it will work with Unreal Engine. Now, here's the documentation page that is currently available at the time of recording, and it says it's for Unreal Engine 4, but that's okay. Eventually, they'll update this for Unreal Engine 5, but I'm going to give you the link to this, and it shows you the Unreal Engine version and which Visual Studio version it's compatible with. And in general, the latest version of Unreal is going to be compatible with the latest version that it shows in the same row here. But of course, we now have Unreal Engine 5, and Unreal Engine 5 just so happens to be compatible with Visual Studio 2022. So we don't have to use 2019. And 2022 is quite a bit faster and more performant. So we're going to be using 2022. Now, if you don't have Visual Studio 2022, you're going to follow the link in the resources for this lecture, and we can download this directly from visualstudio.microsoft. Now, at the time of recording this, it's going to show the latest version, 2022. Now, you may not need the latest version. It depends on the latest version that's compatible with Unreal Engine. So if you ever need an older version, you can scroll all the way down and click on Older Downloads and find the version of Visual Studio that you need. In our case, we do need the latest version, because the latest version is 2022, so we're going to get that. Now, I'm going to click on that, and now we see that we can download Visual Studio, and this drop-down expands to 3 versions here: Community, Professional, and Enterprise. Now, Community is the free version, so that's the one we're going to choose. Now, as soon as I clicked that, I get Visual Studio Setup.exe automatically downloaded, and my Norton tells me that it's safe. Now I can go ahead and launch this executable and click yes. Now this is giving me Visual Studio Installer. This is a program that assists me in installing Visual Studio. If you have Visual Studio already, this is not new to you. I'm going to click Continue. And I'm now presented with the installer. I'm going to go ahead and minimize my web browser. Now all you see behind is my desktop wallpaper. So this is Installer. Now I'm open to the Workloads tab. Now workloads are what we select to include when we install Visual Studio. And for our purposes, we don't need all of these, but there are 3 that we do need. We do need desktop development with C++, so we're going to check that. And that includes all of these that we see that are checked right here. These are all things that we're going to use as C++ developers. We're going to be using Unreal Engine, and Unreal Engine requires that we include a couple other workloads, one of those being .NET Desktop Development. Go ahead and click on that and scroll down just a bit, and we see under Gaming, Game Development with C++. Go ahead and click on that. So we have 3 workloads included: Desktop Development with C++, .NET Desktop Development, and Game Development with C++. So this gives us everything we need for Unreal Engine. Now, it does tell me that I need 9.51 gigabytes of space, so you do need to make sure that you have enough space if you're downloading this. Now, with these 3 selected, I can click Install. Now, this is going to take a few minutes. Okay, so it says we're done installing. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now, it did say that I should probably restart to clean up any files. So I'm going to go ahead and restart my computer. I'm going to close down all my programs first, which means I have to stop recording. And now, before I do that, notice I do have 2 versions of Visual Studio, and you may have an older version of Visual Studio as well. So that's why there are 2 here. If this is your first time downloading Visual Studio, then you'll just have the single version, 2022. Now, you can always come back to the Visual Studio installer to update or modify Visual Studio. So if there are other workloads you need to include, you can always modify from here. Okay, I'm going to restart. Okay, so I have restarted my computer, and now I can search for Visual Studio. And I can bring up Visual Studio Installer, And here's Visual Studio Community 2022, and I can click Launch. Now, it's going to ask if I would like to get started by selecting one of these options or perhaps opening a recent Visual Studio solution. And it's showing the old solutions I have from Visual Studio 2019. But what I'd like to do is continue without code and just open Visual Studio here. So we can actually start to configure some settings here in Visual Studio 2022. Now, the first thing, and if you don't have this already enabled, that I'd like to do is set our theme to dark. Now, you can see that my theme is already dark. But if you have a light theme and you like dark, you can easily change that. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to click on Tools and go to Options here. And in Options, we can go to Environment, which is the topmost selection here. It's already expanded. And here in Environment, we're going to select General. And here in General, there's Color Theme, and you can select Dark. And there are a number of other options here, but I prefer dark. That's what I recommend. Now, there are a number of other options that we should set, and these are recommended by Epic Games. So we're going to walk through and customize some settings for Unreal Engine specifically. So the first thing we're going to do is disable the additional error list that we get by default in Visual Studio, because when compiling C++ code in Unreal Engine, this error list can give us redundant information that's not helpful. So we're going to disable that by going to Projects and Solutions, General, and we're going to uncheck Always Show Error List if build finishes with errors. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you, and this is optional, is the map mode for our scroll bar. This can help when scrolling through large sections of code, like checking out the engine code. So we can go to Text Editor, All Languages, Scroll Bars. And here in Scroll Bars, under Behavior, we have Use Map Mode for Vertical Scroll Bar. And if we go ahead and select that radio button there, then we'll have Map Mode for our scroll bar. And we'll see very shortly what that looks like. Okay, so the next thing that I'd like for us to customize is to disable showing the external dependencies folders. If we show all the external dependencies, it's going to clutter things up. So to keep things nice and neat, we're going to disable external dependencies folders. Now we can do that by going to Text Editor, and instead of All Languages, we're going to choose C, C++, Advanced, and right here we see Hide External Dependencies Folders. We're going to set this to True. So select this little cell where there's a false there, click the drop down, and change that to True. Now the next thing we should do is make sure we have IntelliSense enabled. So we're going to scroll down to the IntelliSense section here. And right here where it says Disable IntelliSense, make sure that's set to false. So if it's set to true, change it to false. You definitely want IntelliSense. This will give us autocomplete. It will help us to see the input parameters for functions. It's very useful. And of course, if IntelliSense is ever behaving in a way that you don't like, you can change some of the settings here, but I'm going to leave these settings as is. I like how they work. Now, another thing that I'd like to do is turn off the Show Inactive Blocks feature. Otherwise, any code embedded in macros will appear grayed out. Now, if you don't know what macros are, we will cover those. But for this feature, we'll go to Text Editor, C, C++, and to the View section, and under Inactive Code, we see Show Inactive Blocks. We're going to set this to false. We don't want to see those inactive blocks. Now, another thing we're going to turn off is Edit and Continue features, because it's recommended with Unreal Engine 5 that we use live coding rather than hot reloading. And again, this is something that we'll learn about very soon. Now, to turn off Edit and Continue features, we're going to go to Debugging, which is right here, and under General, we're going to scroll down, and here we see Enable Edit and Continue and Hot Reload. We're going to uncheck that. We do not want that enabled. So make sure that's unchecked. Now, with all of these settings, we can go ahead and click OK, and we're done with those options. Now, just another thing I'd like to customize is right here, we have this drop down. This is for our solution configuration display box. This tells us what configuration we're currently working in. I'd like this to be wider so we can actually read the full development build. So what we're going to do is right click right here on the bar and go all the way down to Customize and select the Commands tab and choose Toolbar here. And we're going to change from Build to Standard. So we're going to scroll down and look for Standard and select that. And right here, we see the Solution Configurations bar here. We want to modify this, so select Modify Selection. And here's its width. It's only 65. That's why it's so short up there. So we're going to change it to 200 and click OK. And now see, it's nice and wide. And we can click Close. Now, if you're ever missing buttons, you're not sure what happened to some of your icons, or there are icons that you'd like to add, you can click this little drop-down widget, and under Add or Remove Buttons, we have all the buttons, and you can check and uncheck. So you can add options if you'd like those options, or you can remove some. So this is another way to customize your toolbar. And with that, we now have Visual Studio 2022. And this is great. And if we want, we can make a test C++ project just to see if we can compile and run some basic code. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go to File, New, and Project. Now, we can make a project in various ways, but if we scroll down, right here we see Empty Project, Start from Scratch with C++ for Windows. We can select that and click Next and give our project a name. And this is just a test. So I'm going to call this project Test and throw it in a folder somewhere here on my D drive. I'm going to delete it later, but I'm going to select my D drive, call this solution test, and click Create. And now we see a few more things. Here's our configuration dropdown. Now we see that it's no longer grayed out, but it's in debug. And here in the Solution Explorer, we can add a new CPP file. So I'm going to right click, go to Add New Item, and just make a CPP file. I'm going to call this, I can leave it source, that's fine. And we can go ahead and click Add. And we have our C++ file. Now look at my scroll bar. This is that map mode scroll bar. Now, if you don't like this, you can always go back and disable it. But we'll see when there are many lines of code how this can be useful, as it's going to show a miniature of the lines of code in our files. So this is going to be great. Now, we can just make the most simple C++ program possible. Not really, because we're going to print some text to the screen, but this will be pretty basic. We're going to make our main function. So we'll say int main. And just above the main function, we'll add an include. And I'd like to add some text to the screen by the use of IOStream. You should be familiar with IOStream. We're not going to use it at all in Unreal Engine, but it's great for learning C++, so you can print things to the screen. And what we're going to do in main is access the standard namespace so we can get C out. And we're going to print testing VS 2022 and a semicolon. And we can go ahead and just run this in debug mode. So I'm going to click the play button for local Windows debugger. It's going to compile for me. It's going to run my project. And here we see testing VS 2022 Visual Studio is working. Perfect. So I'm going to close that out. We have a working test project, and we're all configured and ready to start programming in Unreal Engine. I'll see you soon.